Okay, here are a few words on Of Mice and Men, Chapter 4. We get a couple characters humanized for us in this chapter. One of them is Crooks, and Crooks is almost this separate entity for most of this, and Steinbeck shines a light on him to show some of our themes as well. And obviously, the theme of loneliness versus companionship comes up again. You see characters like him. One aspect is inflicting pain on others to convince themselves that they actually want loneliness. He is very curt and abrupt and even mean to Lenny to start the chapter. And he's going to be nasty to him and try to convince him that this is not his spot and he needs to get out of there. It's ironic because Crooks is exceptionally lonely, but this is what people do in an effort to stave off loneliness or to at least make it feel like it's their choice. Humans will inflict pain on others in order to make themselves believe that loneliness is actually what they want. The other thing Crooks does for us in this chapter is shows us the balancing point for George and Lenny, and how much Lenny needs George as a balance point. Crooks says some interesting things. On page 72 in my book, Crooks, after telling Lenny to just suppose George never comes back, what would happen to you if George never comes back? And Crooks says, maybe you can see now. You got George. You know he's going to come back. Suppose you didn't have nobody. Suppose you couldn't go into the bunkhouse and play rummy because you was black. How'd you like that? Suppose you had to sit out here and read books. Sure, you could play horse shows till it got dark, but then you got to read books. Books ain't no good. A guy needs somebody to be near him. Crooks recognizes this from a life of having no one. And so despite his gruffness to begin the chapter, he obviously wants companionship. He continues on page 73. I didn't mean to scare you. He'll come back. I was talking about myself. A guy sits alone out here at night, maybe reading books or thinking or stuff like that. Sometimes he gets thinking and got nothing to tell what's going on and what ain't so. Maybe if he sees something, you don't know whether it's right or not. He can't turn to some other guy and ask him if he sees it too. He can't tell. He got nothing to measure by. In other words, he has no balancing point. Crooks is speaking about himself and what he is lacking in his life, and we see how fortunate George and Lenny are to have each other. And again, don't forget just how rare this is. This is not a common thing for these people, and you can see how hungry Crooks is for it. You see also the hope that Lenny has and that Candy has. They both speak glowingly about this long-term fulfilling dream. Crooks mocks this a little bit. You're nuts. I've seen hundreds of men come by on the road and on their ranches with their bindles on their back and that same thing in their heads. Hundreds of them. They come and they quit and go on, and every damn one of them got a little piece of land in his head. And never one of them ever gets it. Just like heaven. Everybody wants a little piece of land. I read plenty of books out here. Nobody ever gets to heaven, and nobody gets no land. It's in their heads. The best laid schemes of mice and men often go wrong. Crooks says, I don't know what you're hoping for. It's not going to work out. But he catches the hope bug by talking to Lenny, by talking to Candy, by discussing how this is going to happen. We have a plan, it's going to happen. Crooks actually humbles himself and asks to be a part of this. He wants in. Now, this is a dangerous thing for him. We see him for a brief moment get humanized. He is feeling now. He has put himself out there. He is vulnerable. He is asked to be a part of something. And asked to people who are generally people full of companionship. Well, that's a risk, and we can see that because his humanity is torn from him again once Curly's wife comes in. She speaks down to him, and she says true things. She says, I could get you in trouble right now. I could get you lynched right now. You don't talk to me that way. I could kill you right now, and no one would have any problem with it, which is true. And he remembers that. and you see him completely shut back down at the end of the chapter. It's as if the man inside of him is gone, and he puts back up this layer because he's being sucked back into the loneliness. Um, and the problem with hoping for a minute for companionship, for a way out of his current life, is that when the hopes are dashed, there is real pain. The best laid schemes of mice and men often go wrong. His plan, his brief plan, just for a minute, was to join with them. And it left him nothing but pain because his hope was dashed immediately by his situation. And so Curley runs the gamut of all of the lines of that poem and of all of the major themes in our text in one short chapter. And so it's an intense chapter for him. We also obviously see a lot of Curley's wife, and you should be asking questions about her and why she's behaving in a certain way. She walks in, obviously full of flirting, obviously trying to entice men. You have to ask yourself why. If you're reading this book, she is married to somebody with money. Why would she be walking around with these impoverished workers, throwing herself out there? We see a hint of it here in chapter 4. But Crooks says to her, maybe you better go along to your own house now. We don't want no trouble. And her response is, well, I ain't giving you no trouble. Think I don't like to talk to somebody every now and once in a while? Think I like to stick in that house all the time? In other words, don't you think I'm lonely too? She is. She is battling loneliness because no matter how powerful Curly's position might be, he is no sort of companion for her. Now, of course, you see her flirting nature. It's quite blatant on page 80. She is putting herself out there to Lenny. We talked about there being two major risks, Curly and Curly's wife. Well, here's Curly's wife putting herself out there. Lenny looked to Candy for help. She is suspected he is the one to do with Curly's hand. And Lenny says, he got his hand caught in a machine. Curly's wife laughed. Okay, machine. I'll talk to you later. I like machines. And this is some just obvious flirting. Candy sees it. He tries to stop her. You let this guy alone. Don't you go messing around with him. I'm going to tell George what you says. Well, who's George, she asked. The little guy you come with? Oh, is there another one? Is there somebody else for me to flirt with? Lenny smiled happily. That's him. That's the guy. And he's going to let me tend the rabbits. Now, her response is just inviting. Well, if that's all you want, I might get a couple of rabbits myself. She is a temptress. She is trying to suck him in. We understand some of this behavior because of her loneliness, but it is still a significant threat to Lenny and to his well-being. But you see her treat other people poorly when they challenge her. But again, you have this desire to inflict pain anytime you're rejected so that you don't have to hurt, so that you don't have the little bit of hope that's going to get smashed down. And so we take chapter 4 and we still look at the same themes, but they're through different characters in this very tightly written novel. So a little thoughts for you on chapter 4, and your final reading is chapters 5 and 6 together. Everything will be resolved. It is an intense 2 chapters, and we'll talk a lot about that.